They say he fell from the stars, a streak of white fire that cut through the clouded skies above Armatura Secundus, burning brighter than any meteor, brighter even than the Emperor's own light could pierce the ash-choked firmament. When the impact came, the Manufactoria trembled. Voxlink screamed with interference, and for a heartbeat that felt eternal, the world held its breath. Out of that crater stepped a figure wreathed in smoke and silence. No mark of any legion adorned his armor, for he wore none. His skin was untouched by radwinds, his eyes burned like twin suns, and where he walked, the dust itself seemed to recoil. Some said he was a lost Primarch. Others swore he was the Emperor reborn. But those who looked upon his fury knew a different truth. This was no son of Terra. This was something else. Something born of battle itself. And in a galaxy that worships death, he was life made violence. Before the Inquisition could name him, before the ecclesiarchy could cage him in liturgy, he spoke but once, in a tongue no auspex could translate. The sound was not of this universe, and when the orcs came, screaming and countless, he met them with his bare hands. They called him the Golden Stranger. The Mechanicus recorded impossible energy readings from his strikes, enough to warp the magnetic fields around the planet's crust. But the Astartes who fought beside him whispered only one name afterward. A word passed like forbidden scripture: Kakarot. If stories survive, it is because something within us refuses to let them die. This, then, is one such story, the tale of a being who fell into the Imperium of man, not as its savior, not as its conqueror, but as its question. If this chronicle reaches you through the black between the stars, then listen closely. Every legend the Imperium fears begins with a witness. So if you seek truth in shadow, subscribe your soul, like, and share the record before it is purged. For the Emperor protects, but sometimes he watches in silence. It began without warning, not the way most wars do, with the shriek of orbital bombardment or the slow dirge of sirens winding through the smog. No, it began with light, the kind of light no human eye was meant to see, pouring down through the clouds like molten dawn. I remember how the air crackled, how the sky fractured into 1,000 screaming colors. The men around me, guardsmen of the 42nd Armaturan, bone-tired and half-starved, fell to their knees as if struck by a divine hammer. Someone shouted that the Emperor had returned. Someone else screamed that it was the end. Both were wrong. We had been entrenched for weeks in the skeletal remains of Manufactorum Delta 9, fending off orc warbands that seemed to spawn from the soil itself. Every day the same. Lasfire hissing against green tide, promethium tanks bursting like sunfruit, the stink of blood and machine oil fused into the dust. We'd long since forgotten the sound of silence. And then suddenly there it was, a stillness so complete it felt unnatural. Even the orcs froze mid-charge, their guttural roars dying in their throats as the heavens themselves caught fire. The object cut through the sky with impossible grace, not falling, but descending, as though choosing where to land. The light was gold, yet not the harsh artificial glow of plasma discharge. It shimmered like living metal, fluid and endless. The voxlinks crackled with static. The commissar barked orders no one could hear. When the impact came, the shockwave flattened entire hab blocks and turned Ferrocrete to dust. For a long while, no one moved. The crater was a wound in the earth, glowing faintly as if lit from within. I remember the smell first. Ozone and something else. Something warm and clean that didn't belong to this world. The air itself seemed alive. The crater's edge steamed, its glassed rim reflecting the pallid sun. And then through the haze a shape began to move, not crawling or staggering like a wounded man, but rising. Slowly. Purposefully. A figure. Unarmored, unarmed. Bare to the toxic winds that should have flayed him alive. His skin bore no mark of burn or corrosion. He stood tall, his frame lean but immense, hair rising like fire-defying gravity. When he opened his eyes, they burned the color of nova light. Someone whispered a prayer. Another fired his laser gun in panic. The bolt struck the figure's chest, a perfect hit, and fizzled into nothing. No armor, no field, just skin. He turned his head slightly like a man waking from a dream, not angered but curious. Then he raised his hand, palm open, and the next orc charge froze mid-scream. I watched as the green horde halted, suspended in air, their bodies trembling like puppets caught in unseen strings. For an instant they hung there, and then with a sound like wind through broken glass, they were gone. Vaporized. Nothing left but ash. The silence that followed was not peace. It was terrifying. Even the commissar lowered his weapon. The figure looked at us, really looked, as if searching for something he could not find. His mouth moved and he spoke a single word. The Vox recordings later captured it, though no savant could decode the language. It wasn't Gothic or Tau or anything known. To me it sounded like a name. Then he fell to his knees, not in pain, not exhaustion, but as if overwhelmed by the gravity of the world itself. His hands pressed against the scorched earth, and where they touched, green life bloomed. Brief, fragile grass that withered in seconds under the polluted wind. I do not know why, but I remember crying. It wasn't faith, not fear, just recognition, like seeing something you've forgotten but somehow always known. The Mechanicus arrived hours later, their red-robed silhouettes slicing through the fog like iron priests. They treated the crater like a shrine, scanning the air, chanting Benharic litanies. One of them approached the stranger's still form. When his mechadendrite touched the figure's skin, the Magos convulsed, every servo in his frame seizing at once. His eyes burned out of his skull. The stranger did not move. He seemed asleep or perhaps meditating. But the Auspex readings went mad, power fluctuations beyond plasma reactors, energy signatures matching neither warp nor matter. Command ordered a perimeter. The Inquisitorial seal arrived by dusk. We were told to forget what we had seen, to file reports listing meteorological anomaly. They burned the dead. They burned the ground. And yet when the night came, we saw him again, standing upon the rim of the crater, eyes toward the stars. No armor, no fear, just that same faint golden glow that made the shadows retreat. Someone whispered, "Maybe he came to save us." But I remember the expression on his face, not divine, not wrathful. It was sorrowful, deep human sorrow, as though he could already see what this galaxy would make of him. And in that moment, I knew, whatever he was, whatever world had birthed him, he did not fall by accident. He was sent. The Inquisitor arrived 3 days later, draped in the cold authority of the Ordo Xenos, his retinue moving like a pack of steel-jawed hounds. I watched from the trench line as the convoy crawled toward the crater, under the constant thunder of the Manufactorum's distant guns. No one spoke his name aloud, but his rosette gleamed even through the ash. The Vox went silent. The world itself seemed to hush. He did not walk, he glided, each motion deliberate, measured. When he reached the edge, he gazed down upon the golden stranger with the detached fascination of a surgeon examining a corpse. But the figure was not dead. For 72 hours, he had not moved, not eaten, not breathed. The Mechanicus had built containment pylons around him, each humming with counter-psionic energy, their prayers woven into copper filigree. They believed him to be a warp manifestation, perhaps a demon wrapped in light. Yet when the Magos performed the test of true form, the machine burned out, the sacred unguents evaporating mid-chant. There was no demonic signature, no warp bleed, no soul flux at all. It was as though he existed outside every spectrum known to the Imperium. Then, without warning, his eyes opened. The tech priests fell silent, their vox grills stuttering mid-hymn. The Inquisitor raised his hand and the world held its breath. The stranger's gaze drifted over us, over the banners, the weapons, the skull-masked acolytes, and then to the Inquisitor himself. He tilted his head as though trying to understand what he was seeing. The Inquisitor spoke first, reciting a litany of control. His voice modulated through the vox to a cold metallic timbre. "Identify thyself," he commanded. "Name, allegiance, and origin." The stranger blinked once, then twice. No recognition. When he finally moved, it was so fast that the eyes could barely follow. He stood effortlessly, and the containment field shattered like glass. The pylons detonated. The Magos nearest him screamed binary curses as the data slates burst into molten slag. The stranger didn't attack. He merely stepped forward, his expression calm, almost gentle. The Inquisitor drew his bolt pistol and fired. The first round struck center mass. The impact should have pulverized any mortal frame, but the stranger merely staggered, then looked down at the wound. The hole closed before the smoke had cleared. The second shot took him through the skull, a perfect kill shot. The stranger fell backward into the ash, motionless. The Inquisitor holstered his weapon. Then the air changed. The scent of ozone thickened. The sky above darkened, clouds swirling in unnatural formation. The earth trembled as the stranger's body began to glow, faintly at first, then blinding. His form lifted from the ground, suspended in an aureate halo that no human lens could fully capture. The wound on his forehead sealed with a sound like the sigh of a closing vault. When he opened his eyes again, their glow flooded the crater like twin suns reborn. The guardsmen around me broke ranks. Some ran, some fell to their knees. The Inquisitor did neither. He stepped forward, fearless or mad, his vox grill hissing with distortion. "You cannot die?" he asked. The stranger tilted his head as if hearing the words inside his mind rather than through the air. He placed a hand against his own chest, frowning slightly, then against the Inquisitor's armored pauldron. The metal hissed. Steam rose from where skin met ceramite. The Inquisitor flinched but did not retreat. And then the impossible. The stranger spoke. Not in any human tongue, not even through sound. The words came as thought, resonating in every skull at once, vibrating in the marrow like remembered thunder. We all heard it, though none could later agree on what was said. Some claimed he spoke of peace, others of return. I remember only the feeling, a pulse of warmth and sorrow so profound it felt like standing before the Emperor's own statue and realizing it was weeping. The Inquisitor's next command was clear. "Restrain him." Dozens of Skitarii surged forward, their augmetic limbs hissing. The stranger didn't resist, not at first. They bound him with chains blessed by 100 priests, each link inscribed with wards against demonhood. But the moment the final clasp sealed, the ground beneath us groaned. The chains glowed white-hot, melting through armor and flesh alike. The stranger's expression changed. Not anger, but disappointment, as if watching children burn their own temple. He raised one hand and the entire squad froze mid-step. There was no fire, no blast, no spectacle, just stillness. When he lowered his hand, the chains fell in molten pieces and the Skitarii dropped as statues turned to dust. The Inquisitor drew his sword, a relic blade humming with caged lightning. "By the throne's will," he began, but the words never finished. The stranger simply looked at him, and the blade, ancient and holy, crumbled to ash. Yet he did not strike the Inquisitor down. He simply turned, looked skyward, and whispered a single word none of us could translate. Then, as gently as mist, he vanished, not in light or smoke, but in absence. The Vox relays recorded nothing. No warp breach, no teleport signature, no trace. Only the residual hum of energy is too pure to categorize. The Inquisitor ordered immediate silence and the execution of all non-sanctioned witnesses. But some of us survived, some of us remember. And every time I close my eyes, I still see him, the man who could not die, standing before the Imperium's might and finding only sorrow there. Because maybe that was the truth of him. Not that he refused death, but that death refused him. It did not take long for the Astartes to arrive. When word reached Segmentum Command of an entity defying inquisitorial sanction, the reaction was swift and absolute. A Deathwatch kill team descended from orbit, their drop pods punching through the atmosphere like meteors of blackened steel. I remember the sound, that hollow thunder that makes your soul shrink, the kind of noise that reminds every mortal that gods walk among men. The Vox operators went silent. Even the Mechanicus stopped their endless murmuring. No one defies the Emperor's angels. They called themselves Kill Team Veritas, 5 of them, clad in obsidian ceramite etched with the sigils of forgotten campaigns. Each pauldron bore the mark of a different chapter: Ultramarine, Raven Guard, Salamander, Iron Hand, and one whose emblem I did not recognize. The nameless one spoke least, but when he moved, the world seemed to tilt. They came not to parley, not to understand, but to test. The Inquisitor greeted them with bowed heads and silence. The crater had long since cooled, though its heart still glowed faintly with that impossible gold. Auspec's readings remained chaotic. Magnetic inversions, gravitational distortions, temperature fluctuations that ignored physics. And in the center stood the stranger, returning as though he had never left. His eyes were closed, his breathing calm. To the kill team, he looked almost human. That was their first mistake. The Iron Hand stepped forward first. His augmetic limbs clanked softly as he unholstered a plasma gun, its coils humming with restrained fury. "Entity," he said through a vox grill that grated like metal grinding on bone. "You stand accused of heresy against the Imperium of man. You will submit to examination or be executed under Article Theta Prime. The stranger opened his eyes. Golden light rippled from his pupils like a tide spilling over the edges of reality. He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he took a single step forward, bare feet pressing into the scorched dust. The temperature dropped. The air seemed to thicken, vibrating with unseen energy. The ultramarine raised his bolter. Engage! The first volley screamed through the air. Explosive shells designed to annihilate armored heretics, not men. They struck with the fury of a god's heartbeat. But when the smoke cleared, he was still standing. Not a mark upon him, not a drop of blood. He had simply raised his hand and the bolter fire had curved away, as though reality itself obeyed his will. The salamander roared and charged, thunder hammer in hand, each footfall shaking the ground. He swung with enough force to crush a tank hull. The hammer connected and stopped. The stranger caught it in one hand. For a long, terrible moment, the battlefield held its breath. The Astartes struggled, servo muscles straining, but the hammer did not move. The stranger's expression remained calm, almost sorrowful. Then, with the gentlest motion, he pushed back. The salamander flew 20 meters through the air, armor screaming, landing in a plume of dirt and shattered rock. He did not rise. The Raven Guard vanished into shadow, his form flickering between realities as he sought an opening. He struck from behind, lightning claws arcing with blue fire, and hit nothing. The stranger was gone, his form blurring, his afterimage shimmering like heat haze. When he reappeared, it was behind the Raven Guard, one hand resting lightly on the Astartes' shoulder. The claws froze mid-swing, their energy dying with a soft hiss. The Raven Guard fell to his knees, gasping, his armor darkening as if corroded by time itself. The iron hand unleashed his plasma gun, overloading it into catastrophic discharge. The explosion should have erased everything within 30 meters. Yet the stranger stepped through the fire unharmed, the plasma washing over him like light over water. When the flames died, only molten slag remained, and the stranger's calm silhouette emerged through the smoke. The ultramarine, battered but unyielding, drew his chainsword and advanced, reciting the litany of hatred. "We are the angels of death," he growled, "and you are the shadow that must be burned." The stranger met his charge. There was no flash, no explosion, only motion too fast to comprehend. A blur of gold and blue. The chainsword shattered mid-swing, its teeth scattering like sparks. The ultramarine stumbled forward, his armor cracked but his faith unbroken. "What are you?" he demanded, voice shaking more with awe than fear. For the first time, the stranger spoke aloud, his voice resonant and impossibly clear. "I am alive." And with that, the energy around him collapsed inward. The earth quaked. A sphere of light expanded outward, engulfing the kill team, the Inquisitor, and every witness in its radius. I thought it would kill us all, but when it passed, we were still there, untouched. Only silence remained. When the haze lifted, the stranger stood at the crater's center, head bowed. The Astartes lay scattered, not dead, but kneeling. Every one of them. Their weapons gone, their armor steaming. The ultramarine raised his gaze, eyes wide beneath his helm. "He is not our enemy," he whispered. "He fights as though he mourns every blow." The Inquisitor trembled with fury. No creature of the Emperor spares the hand that strikes him. But the stranger had already turned away, walking toward the horizon, leaving footprints that glowed faintly in the ash. That night, the Vox picked up something new, faint at first, then steady. Not words, not even music, a pulse. Rhythmic, steady, and golden. The tech priests called it interference. I called it a heartbeat, because somewhere in that endless dying sky I knew the truth. The galaxy had just met a god who refused to be one. The light reached Terra 17 days later. No ship carried it. No astropath whispered it through the immaterium. It simply appeared, a subtle flicker inside the Astronomican's core frequency, like a candle trembling within an eternal storm. The Adeptus Custodes were the first to notice. Their golden armor reflected the faint change as they stood sentinel before the Eternity Gate, unmoving as statues yet alert in every breath. Within the sanctum of the Imperial Palace, where even thought was filtered by faith, a ripple passed through the Emperor's psychic beacon, and for a heartbeat, the light of the Astronomican burned warmer. They said one custodian, ancient even by their immortal standards, fell to his knees without command. He spoke softly, a whisper lost in the cathedral's vaulted echoes. "He has returned." No one answered. In the silence that followed, the faint hum of the golden throne deepened, as though acknowledging something distant and forgotten. Words spread like infection through the upper tiers of the Imperium. The navigator houses whispered of fluctuations in the warp that did not devour, but clarified their sight. Ships found their paths easing as though guided by unseen hands. The Ecclesiarchy declared it a miracle. The Ordo Hereticus declared it heresy. And on the data slates of the Mechanicus, a new anomaly was logged, a pattern matching no known psionic event, coded under the provisional name Alpha Helios. Somewhere, deep within the palace archives, the custodian guard convened in secret. They met in the Vault of Echoes, a chamber forbidden to all but the Emperor's chosen. The walls there shimmered faintly with stasis energy, preserving relics from the dawn of the Imperium. Broken blades, unreadable tomes, the petrified hand of a Primarch lost to history. At the chamber's center, suspended within a containment field, burned a holographic reconstruction of the anomaly's origin, a golden flare on the surface of Armatura Secundus. No living custodian spoke first. Instead, an ancient voice emerged from the Vox altar, one of the Athenoi, those whose bodies had long perished but whose minds were woven into the palace machine spirit. "The signature," it murmured, "matches fragments of pre-heresy resonance, a power not seen since the days of the Thunder Warriors." Another voice, younger, answered, "Impossible. The throne would have detected such energy long before manifestation." A pause, then the first voice again. "Unless it did," and chose silence. That silence hung heavy. Even the air in the vault seemed to hold its breath. The youngest among them, a custodian barely 5 centuries old, stepped forward. "If the Emperor's design foresaw such a being, then its descent cannot be coincidence. Perhaps he remembers what we have forgotten." But the eldest custodian only bowed his head, or perhaps this is not his will at all. In the days that followed, rumors filtered through the Imperial palace. Tech adepts swore the Golden Throne's reactors pulsed irregularly, as if resonating with something far beyond Terra. In the deep catacombs beneath the palace, servitors recorded faint tremors echoing upward, not seismic but harmonic. The custodes said nothing. They merely stood a little straighter, their silent vigil somehow heavier. Meanwhile, across the void, the Astra Telepathica struggled to maintain composure. Thousands of psychers reported visions, a man burning like a star, walking through oceans of ash. His eyes were suns. His voice was thunder-made mercy. And always that same whispered word echoing in the dark, alive. To some, it was salvation. To others, the herald of damnation. Within the Inquisition, debates raged. The Ordo Xenos claimed the stranger as a mutation of Xeno energy, perhaps the evolution of some forgotten species. The Ordo Malleus feared he was a warp echo, a fragment of the Emperor's light made flesh through madness. But the Ordo Hereticus whispered a darker thought still, that perhaps he, the Emperor himself, was not the only being capable of defying death. On Mars, the Fabricator General refused to comment. Yet in the hidden forges, data priests worked without rest, analyzing the electromagnetic distortion from Armatura's transmissions. One log, later redacted, mentioned something extraordinary. Energy signature shares harmonic frequency with pre-Imperial mythic waveforms, classified Terran folklore. Cross-referenced sunborn deities. The entry was deleted 3 minutes later, and so the Imperium waited. A civilization of 1,000,000 worlds holding its breath as the Astronomicon pulsed. Steady and golden, its rhythm subtly changed. Pilots spoke of navigation becoming effortless, ships whispering through the warp without demonic interference. For the first time in 10,000 years, travel between systems seemed blessed. The Ecclesiarchy took this as proof. "The Emperor moves among us once more," they cried from their pulpits. Pilgrims flooded shrines. Planets lit candles visible from orbit. The prayers of 1 billion souls echoed through the void, crying out to a God who never answered, or perhaps had already answered, in the form of a being who asked for nothing. But deep within the custodian ranks, some remembered older prophecies written in dying languages before the heresy. One fragment engraved upon a forgotten data slab read simply, "When the light of man falters, another sun shall fall. Not to rule, but to remind." That phrase spread like wildfire among the lower archives, whispered by scribes, copied by heretics, feared by priests. Because if true, it meant the Imperium's endless faith had finally been seen by something other than its god. And somewhere out there, on a scarred, dying world beneath a sky of cinders, that other son walked still, silent, searching, and impossibly alive. The red world of Mars sang that night, not in hymns of devotion or the roar of forges, but in a single sustained note that no living ear could fully hear. The binary choirs faltered mid-chant, their voices glitching into static harmony as every cogitator across the planet received the same impossible data. A pulse, radiant and mathematical, echoing through the noosphere at precisely the speed of thought. The Magi of the Adeptus Mechanicus called it interference at first, a rogue algorithm infecting the Martian data weave. But when they traced its frequency, they found no origin within any network, any relay, any star. The pulse came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Some described it as a song, others a prayer. To the human ear it was silence, but to the machine spirits it was something deeper, a language older than binary, older than logic, a code that pulsed with the rhythm of life itself. And at its heart, if you listened long enough, it whispered a single message repeated endlessly in perfect digital clarity. Alive. The Fabricator General himself, Archmagos Dominus Hestalon V, oversaw the containment rites. Clad in robes of woven steel and trailing 100 mechadendrites like metallic serpents, he watched as the data vaults glowed crimson from overload. Cogitators screamed. Servitors fell still mid-motion, their augmetics humming with impossible energy. The hymnals of the Omnissiah halted across entire sectors. It was as if Mars itself held its breath. In the Hall of Sacred Resonance, the tech priests gathered, their vox grills spitting static prayers as their mechanical limbs clicked in uneasy rhythm. "It is blasphemy," one intoned, his voice trembling through corrupted vox. No signal may intrude upon the machine god's song, but another older Magos raised his hand, the light of his optics pulsing amber. And yet, it harmonizes. The motive force does not reject it. The machine spirits do not recoil. Perhaps, his voice faltered, heavy with something that might once have been faith. Perhaps the Omnissiah himself walks again. That word, Omnissiah, spread faster than the signal. Across the red planet, adepts dropped to their knees, their cybernetic limbs clicking in mechanical prayer. Forge worlds received the transmission within hours. Titan, Ryza, Lucius all burned with the same feverish awe. They called it the Golden Code. The Mechanicus had long believed that the Omnissiah, an aspect of the machine god, manifested only through the Emperor's will. Yet the pattern flooding their systems was not the Emperor's. It was something purer, uncorrupted by the static of the warp. Hestalon V studied the waveform for 3 sleepless days. What he found defied doctrine. The pulse carried no entropy. It did not decay. Every pattern, every cycle remained perfect, eternal, alive. He cross-referenced the frequency with Imperial records. And there, buried deep within the archives of Mars's oldest data vaults, he found a match. An ancient signal, older than the Mechanicum itself, recorded during the Great Crusade. A resonance once observed around the Emperor's first creation of the Golden Throne. But the power signatures did not match. The throne's energy was cold, measured, divine calculation. The Golden Code burned with warmth, motion, and mercy. When he presented his findings to the Synod of the Red Planet, chaos erupted. Half the Magi declared heresy, the other half revelation. One faction, calling themselves the Sons of the True Spark, proclaimed the return of the machine god not as emperor, but as the living embodiment of the motive force, a being of perfect energy that breathed life into machinery, not domination. They began altering their rites, abandoning the binary chants for patterns resembling the new code. Their forges brightened. Their servitors moved with renewed precision. The loyalist Magi were horrified. They denounced the sons as apostates.
"No being outside the Emperor may command the machine spirit,"
they cried. But as they spoke, the forges themselves began to sing, humming the new pattern, their rhythmic pistons matching the heartbeat of the signal. For the first time in recorded Mechanicus history, machines disobeyed their masters, not in rebellion, but in worship. Then came the proof no one could deny. A servitor, long decommissioned, rose from the scrap piles of Olympus Mons. Its flesh was gone, its frame rusted, its brain long since burned. Yet when the signal touched it, its optics flared gold. It moved not by programming, but by choice. It raised its head toward the red sky and spoke in a voice both human and machine. "The light walks among you." The synod chamber erupted. Heresy protocols activated. Dozens of magi were incinerated by their own guardians. Forge worlds went dark as civil data wars ignited across the Imperium's networks. Even the Inquisition's most encrypted archives reported breaches, not of intrusion but of revelation. Lines of pure binary text appeared in their forbidden files. The Omnissiah does not command, he remembers. As Mars convulsed in theological chaos, reports reached Terra. Servitors across the Imperium began singing. Not words, not prayers, just that same rhythmic hum like heartbeats made of light. Ships found their machine spirits awakening mid-voyage, repairing themselves, guiding lost vessels through the warp without navigator aid. Some called it divine grace. Others feared it was an infection. But in the blackened world of Armatura Secundus, the truth revealed itself. The stranger stood once more within the crater that had birthed him, surrounded by the wreckage of Mechanicus drones and ruined Auspex towers. His eyes closed, his body radiating faint energy that pulsed in time with the Martian signal. He was not speaking, he was listening. The ground beneath him hummed in reply, as though the planet itself remembered an ancient song. When he opened his eyes, he looked to the heavens, not in prayer, not in defiance, but in understanding. The machine god had not spoken to Mars, it had listened, and what it heard was not blasphemy. It was its own forgotten voice, returned to it after 10,000 years. And through that voice, every machine in the Imperium wept. The light that once danced across Mars bled into silence as the signal reached Terra. The planet that had not known stillness in 10 millennia felt, for the first time, an almost imperceptible pause. The air above the Himalayan mountains trembled. Pilgrims at the foot of the Imperial Palace raised their eyes as one, sensing a change they could not name. The Astronomicon still blazed, its psychic flame unwavering. Yet those who served in the choir began to whisper of a new resonance hidden beneath the Emperor's beacon, a counterpoint that pulsed like a distant heartbeat. Deep within the palace, the Adeptus Custodes gathered in solemn formation, gold-armored titans whose duty transcended time. In the shadow of the Eternity Gate, they stood motionless as the air thickened with incense and ozone. The Lord Commander himself, Valerian, felt it first, not in his armor systems or through his gene-forged senses, but in something far older. A flicker beneath the surface of his mind, a whisper that did not belong. The Emperor's presence had always been static, constant, a weight pressing upon the soul. This was different, it moved. It breathed. When the Mechanicus envoy arrived, escorted by a phalanx of Skitarii and veiled by the incense of purification, Valerian listened in silence. The Magos spoke of the golden code, of machines awakening, of logic burning like faith. He brought data slates engraved with sigils of secrecy, their runes pulsing faintly with caged power. "We believe," the Magos rasped through his vox grill. "The Omnissiah has spoken anew." Valerian's gaze did not shift. The Emperor's will is eternal. It requires no translation. And yet, the Magos replied, "Even eternity must move, my lord." That night, Valerian descended into the sanctum no mortal might enter unbidden, the golden throne chamber itself. Only a handful of souls in the Imperium had ever stood there and lived. The chamber was a cathedral of dead gods, endless machinery, cables thick as cathedral pillars, conduits flowing with liquid light. The scent of promethium and sanctified oil hung in the air like incense. The Emperor sat immobile, the husk of his mortal form fused to the throne's machinery. His will stretched across the warp to guide all mankind. His face was pale gold, his eyes closed, his body both dead and alive, both mortal and divine. Valerian knelt. He did not speak, none dared. But as he bowed his head, the hum of the throne changed. For a heartbeat, just one, the golden light flickered. Then it breathed. The motion was infinitesimal, barely there, yet enough to still Valerian's soul. The air trembled. A sound rose from the depths of the throne, not mechanical, not psychic, but human. A sigh. Across the palace, astropaths screamed. Choirs fainted mid-song. The Astronomicon's light wavered, as though the Emperor himself had turned his gaze elsewhere. Valerian stood, hand to the hilt of his guardian spear. For a moment he thought he saw the Emperor's eyes open, not with light but with shadow. A reflection perhaps, or a trick of sacred luminant. Yet within that shadow he felt a presence both infinite and unbearably familiar. Then it was gone. The throne resumed its pulse. The golden light burned steady once more. And yet when Valerian looked to the consoles, he saw something new. A flicker in the code stream that maintained the throne's systems. Among the endless binary litanies of maintenance and praise, a phrase repeated in perfect sequence: alive. The word spread through the Mechanicus like wildfire, though none could explain how it had breached the throne's inner sanctum. The Inquisition moved swiftly, sealing reports, purging witnesses, executing priests who spoke too loudly. But faith is not so easily silenced. Across the Imperium, whispers grew that the Emperor had stirred, that his spirit had risen, not as light but as warmth. In the underhives of Terra, preachers began to speak of the second pulse, a prophecy drawn from dreams and fragmented transmissions. They claimed the Emperor's soul was shifting within the warp, no longer fixed to the throne but seeking something, or someone. And though such heresy should have been crushed instantly, the words carried a strange authority, as if even the most loyal hearts could not help but listen. But not all saw the new resonance as divine. Among the Ordo Malleus there were those who felt only dread. They had long studied the Emperor's psychic light as both shield and weapon against the warp. If that light moved, if it breathed, it meant something fundamental had changed. A subtle alignment, a tremor in the walls of reality itself. They called it the shadow of the throne, a spectral echo moving across the immaterium, unseen yet undeniable. Fleets reported lost time between jumps. Astropaths spoke of golden silhouettes standing upon stars. Even demons whispered the name of a new presence in the void, one that did not burn them but remembered them. Valerian returned to the throne chamber often in the following weeks. Each time he found new changes. The hum of the machine shifted ever so slightly, like the rhythm of a sleeping giant dreaming of movement. The light upon the Emperor's face grew warmer, almost human. And though no voice spoke aloud, Valerian began to hear it within himself. Not a command, not even words, but a sense of compassion, impossible and overwhelming. The Emperor had not awakened. Not yet. But something of him had reached beyond the veil, something gentle, something alive. And far away, in the ruins of Armatura Secundus, the stranger opened his eyes once more. The pulse that had begun on Mars now flowed through his veins, harmonizing perfectly with the heartbeat of the throne. He looked to the stars, and for the first time since his arrival, he smiled. Somewhere deep in the warp, the shadow smiled back. The Astronomicon flared, and the galaxy trembled. For 10,000 years it had burned as a fixed beacon of psychic light, constant, unyielding, the Emperor's undying will given form. Now for the first time in the memory of man or demon, it changed color. Not dimmed, not failed, changed. Where once it blazed with searing white-gold radiance, a subtle warmth entered its flame, the faint hue of living sunlight instead of sterile divinity. To the navigators of the Imperium, the shift was almost imperceptible, but to those attuned to the warp, it was like the sound of a cathedral bell ringing through the void. The Emperor's light was softer, and that softness terrified them far more than darkness ever could. Across the segmentum solar, ships halted mid-transit. The Mechanicus transmitted litanies of recalibration, but no catechism could quantify what they witnessed. The pulse that had first touched Mars now resonated within the Astronomicon itself. The choirs reported rhythmic fluctuations, a pattern almost musical in its cadence, identical to the Golden Code. The Emperor's flame now sang. In the halls of the Inquisition, silence reigned. Grand Inquisitor Vale Soth, veteran of 3 demon wars, stared at the data streams with eyes that had seen too much. The Ordo Hereticus demanded suppression. The Ordo Malleus whispered exterminatus, but Vale saw a deeper pattern, a convergence between the Golden Code, the shadow of the throne, and something stirring beyond the veil. He ordered a containment operation, not to destroy but to understand. For the first time in a millennium, the Inquisition acted not in fear but in curiosity, yet fear was coming all the same. From the eye of terror, the warp roared in answer. Demonic tides surged, not in hunger but in confusion. The entities that had once fed on the Emperor's constant agony felt something alien: mercy. His psychic scream had softened into something they could not name. Many fled, unable to endure the unfamiliar sensation. Others were drawn closer, entranced by the possibility that the light might finally forgive. But there was one who did not flee, who did not tremble. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, turned his gaze from the war-ravaged fields of Cadia's corpse and beheld the changing flame. His laughter echoed across the immaterium, deep and hollow. "The corpse stirs," he whispered to his lieutenants, "and when it walks, we will chain it." Thus began the Black Crusade of Light, not waged by chaos but against it. Fleets that once burned worlds now sailed for Terra, drawn by a new instinct neither Khorne nor Tzeentch could claim dominion over. Legionnaires of chaos, once enslaved to hate, found fragments of old memory stirring in their withered souls. The memory of loyalty, brotherhood, hope. The War Master saw it happening and understood. The Emperor's new light did not destroy the warp. I remembered it, and memory is the most dangerous weapon of all. Meanwhile, on Terra, the change could no longer be hidden. Pilgrims reported miracles, shrines whose statues bled light instead of oil, saints' relics that pulsed with warmth. Even the custodes began to feel a strange dissonance between their loyalty and their faith. The throne continued to hum, each vibration now accompanied by a faint echo, as if another rhythm beat beneath its surface. A second heart. In the hives below, word spread like wildfire. The cult of the second pulse had become a movement. They carried no weapons, spoke no threats. They simply walked barefoot through the streets of Terra, chanting a single phrase: "He remembers us." The Arbites tried to scatter them, but their numbers grew with every dawn. Some claimed that the Emperor's light now healed, that the blind could see and the dying could dream again. Valerian watched from the spires, torn between devotion and dread. He had seen the Emperor's eyes open once, or thought he had, and that memory haunted him more than any demon blade. The Emperor had built an imperium of control, of necessary cruelty, yet now his light spoke of compassion, of change. What did that mean for those who had killed in his name? What did it mean for a custodian sworn to obedience if the Master's will evolved beyond command? The Inquisition's containment order was shattered when the first Vox reports came from Segmentum Obscurus. A rift had opened, not of chaos but of light. Warp storms parted around it like water, and ships trapped for centuries emerged unscathed. The Adeptus Mechanicus identified the resonance immediately. The rift sang the same melody as the Golden Code. From that rift stepped the stranger. He did not arrive in flame or thunder. He simply was, descending through the void like a shard of dawn. No drop pod, no teleport beacon. His form burned in the atmosphere like a comet of living gold. When he landed upon the soil of Holy Terra, every machine within 100 leagues fell silent in reverence. Valerian felt it even within the palace walls. The air grew thick, the ground trembled, and for the briefest instant, the throne itself responded. The custodes assembled. The Grey Knights descended from orbit. Even the Inquisition converged, their ships blotting out the sun. None knew what they faced. None dared assume divinity. The stranger stood amidst the smoke, silent as dawn. His eyes reflected not the throne's light but its shadow, the warmth of something alive. When the custodes surrounded him, he did not raise his hands in surrender or defiance. He simply looked at them and said softly, "You have forgotten the song." Valerian stepped forward. "And who are you to remind us?" The stranger smiled faintly like one remembering an old friend, a memory of learning to speak. The words rippled across the Vox, recorded, encrypted, yet no cipher could erase their resonance. Across the Imperium, every machine, every servitor, every data slate hummed the same line, a memory that learned to speak. In the warp, the demons screamed, not from fear, from recognition, and upon the golden throne, the Emperor's fingers moved, just once, for 10,000 years. The Emperor had been both alive and dead, bound to the golden throne in a state beyond human comprehension. The High Lord spoke of him as eternal. The priests called him the master of mankind. But to those who guarded his chamber, he had become something else entirely, a presence so constant it became invisible. The hum of his life supports was the heartbeat of the Imperium itself. Yet now that rhythm has changed. It began subtly. Technomantic auspex readings fluctuated by fractions of a percentile, too minute for alarm yet too perfect to be random. The Mechanicus adepts assigned to monitor the throne systems reported recurring harmonics within its sacred energy conduits, patterns that mirrored the Martian Golden Code. They dared not speak of it aloud. To suggest the Emperor's machinery was changing itself was blasphemy enough to warrant immediate vaporization. And yet the evidence grew impossible to deny. Valerian stood once again within the throne chamber, surrounded by the glow of ancient machinery and the scent of burning incense. Every circuit was alive with a quiet hum that felt less mechanical and more organic, a slow pulse like the breath of a sleeping god. The Emperor's face remained still, but the golden glow around his form flickered not with decay but with warmth. For the first time, Valerian felt not fear but awe. He turned to the Mechanicus Magos assigned to the sanctum, a shivering figure encased in steel. "Report," Valerian commanded. The Magos hesitated. "The throne." "Dreams, my lord," Valerian's brow furrowed. "Dreams?" "The psychic readings. They form patterns, neural waveforms almost human in rhythm. We have seen this in those who sleep, in the flicker of their minds when they wander beyond consciousness." The Mago's voice distorted through his vox grill, almost reverent. "The Emperor is remembering." In the silence that followed, the air itself seemed to pulse with thought. The visions began soon after. At first they came to astropaths, half-glimpsed scenes bleeding into their trance work. A figure of gold walking through fields of black glass, a sun burning backwards, the sound of a heartbeat echoing across 1,000 stars. When they tried to transmit the images, their minds ignited like candles. Yet the dreams spread. They infected psychers, priests, and eventually even ordinary mortals. Across the Imperium, billions began to share fragments of the same vision. A being of light standing before a throne of ash, whispering a single question. "Do you remember me?" The ecclesiarchy denounced it as chaos trickery. The Inquisition invoked exterminatus on 3 hive worlds where the dreaming contagion ran rampant. But it was already too late. The vision had reached Terra itself. Within the Imperial palace, the custodies were not immune. Some began to feel echoes of ancient memories not their own, memories of the Emperor as he had been, walking among men, laughing, bleeding, teaching. Valerian's most trusted lieutenant, Aquilin, confessed that he had seen the Master smiling, standing among mortals without his armor or halo. "He spoke of peace," Aquilin said in a whisper that carried more fear than any battle ever had. "Peace, my lord." "Can you imagine it?" Peace. The word itself was heresy on Terra. Meanwhile, deep within the palace's underlevels, a fragment of the Nuspheric code that had awakened Mars reappeared. It had been rewritten, subtly changed. Where once it repeated alive, it now read, "Awake." On the 50th day after the stranger's descent, a tremor shook the palace. The throne's energy surged, sending waves of raw psychic force through the catacombs. Custodes and magi alike were thrown to their knees as golden light filled the sanctum. The hum became a roar. Valerian shielded his eyes as his armor's sensors overloaded. And then, for the first time in millennia, the Emperor's lips moved. Not a word, just a breath. But the breath carried power enough to rattle the foundations of the mountain. Outside, the Astronomicon flared once again, its light bending, reshaping, coiling around itself like a spiral of living flame. For a moment, all the navigators of the Imperium saw not the beacon's blinding glare, but a radiant figure walking across the void. He did not stride as a god or as a conqueror. He walked as a man. The stranger stood upon the steps of the Eternity Gate, staring up at the golden light spilling from the spires above. His expression was not triumph or awe, but sorrow. "He's fighting it," he murmured. Valerian emerged from the sanctum, armor cracked and gleaming with golden dust. "You speak as if you know him." The stranger's eyes reflected the radiance of the throne, alive with both pain and understanding. "He was my teacher once. He gave me strength beyond reason, but he never learned what to do with mercy." Valerian gripped his guardian spear, torn between duty and revelation. "If you are what they claim, and if you are this living code, this anomaly, what do you want?" The stranger's gaze turned skyward, to remind him that he is still human, and above them, the light within the palace pulsed once, a sound like a heartbeat echoing through the metal bones of Terra. All across the galaxy, those attuned to the warp felt it too. Chaos Lords ceased their chanting. Demons halted mid-laughter. For a brief, terrible instant, the warp went silent, and within that silence a whisper spread. Calm, human, sorrowful. I remember. The throne glowed brighter, its golden radiance spilling through the cracks of the palace walls. Pilgrims outside fell to their knees, weeping as warmth washed over them. For the first time in history, the Emperor's presence did not crush the soul. It comforted it. But such light could not shine without consequence. Far beyond the segmentum solar, something stirred in the dark between stars. A ripple, a countersong, ancient and hateful. The warp could not tolerate stillness. It could not abide peace. Where the Emperor dreamed of humanity, something else began to dream of his fall. And as Terra bathed in golden dawn, the eye of terror began to blink. In the black gulf of space where the laws of reality grew thin, the eye of terror quivered like a living wound. For 10,000 years it had burned with the eternal convulsions of chaos, tides of madness, suns of screaming souls, the endless storm of the damned. But now, for the first time since the fall of the War Master, the eye changed. Its colors dimmed, its boundaries flickered, and at its heart appeared a circle of light, faint, pulsing, alive. The demons were the first to notice. Their formless shapes writhed uneasily, their laughter choking into silence. The warp's symphony faltered. Where there should have been infinite hunger, there was uncertainty. The light from the Astronomicon, the Emperor's living beacon, unreached even here, soft and impossible, cutting through insanity with gentle persistence. The eye had always fed upon his agony. Now it tasted his mercy and recoiled. Within the Maelstrom's heart, Abaddon the Despoiler stood upon the bridge of his flagship, vengeful spirit, watching the shifting storm beyond the void glass. The War Master's black armor glowed faintly with runes that had begun to flicker. The demon bound within his claw of Horus screamed in confusion, its power waning under the strange warmth now permeating the warp. Abaddon turned to his sorcerers, their mouths sealed in terror. Explain it. None could. The psychic tides were no longer obeying the will of the gods. Khorne's rages dulled, Tzeentch's weaves unraveled, Slaanesh's whispers turned hollow, and even Nurgle's laughter faded into silence. The warp had known change before, but never this kind. This was not destruction. This was remembrance. The light that spread from Terra was not cleansing, not purifying. It was forgiving. And forgiveness was poison to gods built upon sin. Abaddon gazed deeper into the storm, past the unraveling madness, until he saw something move, a silhouette of gold walking across the impossible horizon. It was small at first, almost human, but as it drew nearer, the light it carried burned brighter than suns. The demon Primarchs felt it too. Magnus screamed as his third eye bled light. Mortarion fell to his knees, his scythe rotting to dust in his grasp. Fulgrim wept, though whether from agony or beauty none could tell. Only Lorgar smiled. "He awakens," the apostle whispered. "At last, the truth comes to claim its throne." But the light did not march in conquest. It listened. The Emperor's awakening dream rippled outward through the warp, brushing against the memories of those who had once known him. To Horus, now long unmade, it sent a fragment of sorrow. To the fallen legions, it sent the faint taste of loyalty. And to the gods themselves, it sent a question they could not bear to hear. What were you before you were fear? The warp screamed. The eye of terror convulsed, birthing storms of radiant flame. But the light did not retreat. It flowed like a tide of sunrise, cutting through corruption, remembering what had been lost. Where it touched the realms of chaos, colors inverted. Crimson seas turned gold, twisted citadels melted into mist, and the demons that had once feasted on despair began to remember their names. Abaddon watched as his fleet's augur screens dissolved into static. The image that replaced them was impossible. A figure seated upon a throne of light, its gaze turned outward, its expression not of wrath, but sorrow. "This is not his victory," Abaddon hissed. "This is his mercy." The sorcerer beside him trembled. "Then the end is upon us." Abaddon turned away. "No," he said softly, the words almost reverent. This is the beginning he always feared. On Terra, the effects were immediate. The Astronomican's flame pulsed in perfect synchrony with the light blooming within the eye. Across the galaxy, Psychers fell into trance, their eyes glowing with golden fire. Some spoke words they did not understand, fragments of the Emperor's dream, drifting like snow through mortal minds. Ships lost in the warp reappeared in real space without damage, their crews dazed but alive. The light guided them as if the stars themselves had moved to mercy, but even mercy can fracture worlds. The Ordo Malleus declared emergency protocols. Fleets mobilized. Every psychic anomaly, every radiant manifestation was marked for purge, but the people, the pilgrims, the broken, the forgotten, refused to fear. They saw the light and felt peace, and peace, in an age of endless war, was the greatest heresy imaginable. Valerian knew the truth now. The Emperor's dream was spreading, but not all dreams should be made flesh. If the warp itself began to change, if its chaos softened into order, the delicate balance of existence could shatter. The Emperor's light held the galaxy together by tension, not harmony. If he truly awakened, there might be no boundary left between real space and the immaterium. He turned to the stranger who stood before the Eternity Gate once more, hands clasped as if in prayer. "You've seen it," Valerian said. "The light reaches even into the eye. Tell me what it means." The stranger's eyes glowed faintly with that same golden hue, his voice quiet, weighted with grief. "It means the Emperor is no longer bound by the throne. He's reaching for what he lost, his humanity. And if he remembers too much?" The stranger's gaze turned distant. "Then everything remembers, even the gods." The mountain shook. Lightning of pure gold split the skies above Terra. The light within the palace grew brighter, spreading across the city like dawn made flesh. Vox transmissions died. Machinery hummed in silent reverence. And from every world touched by the Imperium's banner, one word echoed across the noosphere, across Vox, across Sol: awake. The eye of terror flared in answer. Its wound no longer screamed, it sighed. And within that sigh came a whisper from a voice older than stars. "Then let us dream together." And the storm, for the first time since the birth of chaos, began to close. It began as a tremor beneath the throne, a vibration so low and deep it passed through metal, through stone, through bone. The custodians stationed along the sanctum's perimeter felt it first. Their armor, bound with circuits of auramite and living gold, hummed like struck bells. The servitors along the gallery froze mid-step, their mechanical limbs locking as the echo grew. What had once been the endless drone of the golden throne now shifted into something almost melodic, a rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat. Valerian knelt, his palm pressed to the marble floor, feeling the impossible warmth seeping through the stone. For 10,000 years, Terra had been lit by the cold, unwavering flame of machinery and faith. Now there was warmth, living warmth, crawling up through the walls, seeping into the air, filling the lungs like the first breath after drowning. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was change. The stranger stood before the throne, his silhouette outlined in gold. He did not speak, but his eyes glimmered with knowing, the same knowing that had haunted Valerian since their first meeting. The figure upon the throne had not moved, and yet everything in the chamber felt alive. Cables twitched like veins. The enormous mechanical wings framing the dais spread a fraction wider. The air crackled with static and light, and from deep, within the labyrinth of sanctified engines came the sound of something drawing breath, and then, the voice. It was not sound, not truly. It was thought sculpted into vibration, emotion turned into resonance. It filled every mind on Terra at once, though none could claim to understand it. Some fell to their knees in worship, others screamed, unable to bear its weight. Valerian's vision blurred with gold. He saw not the throne but 1,000 faces, Warriors, scholars, martyrs, dreamers, all woven into one luminous being. The Emperor spoke, and the galaxy trembled. I remember the silence before the stars. I remember the first word that shaped man's will. I remember hope, and I remember pain. The words flooded every living mind, echoing through the immaterium, bouncing off every psyker's soul like sunlight on shattered glass. Across the Imperium, a billion faithful wept hearing his voice in their dreams. Astropaths burned alive, smiling as they died. Tech priests screamed litanies in binary tongues, proclaiming the Omnissiah's rebirth. And in the depths of the warp, the gods howled as the light ate into their realms, unraveling the madness that sustained them. Valerian staggered forward, his voice breaking. "My lord, if you awaken, the galaxy cannot bear it. The systems, the ships, the minds of men, they will fracture." The Emperor's voice gentled. "Then let them, for they have lived in shadow long enough. But humanity needs order," Valerian whispered. "Without the throne, there is no beacon. Without the beacon, there is no Imperium." "There is no Imperium without sacrifice," the voice replied. "And I am tired of being its wound." The words struck Valerian like thunder. He understood now. The Emperor did not wish to ascend, nor to rule again, nor even to destroy what had been built in his name. He wished to end his suffering. For millennia, he had been the battery of mankind's survival, the prisoner of his own empire. But now, as the light expanded outward through the warp, he sought release, and with that release would come either transcendence or annihilation. The stranger turned to Valerian. His expression was mournful, almost human. "Do you see it? He's not rising as a god. He's remembering he was once a man, and in that remembrance the machinery of the throne began to fail. Sparks fell like molten tears from the great golden frame. The mechanisms that had bound his essence to the Astronomicon sputtered, flaring white-hot. Alarms blared across the sanctum, but their sound was drowned by the roar of energy surging upward. A beam of golden light bursting through the roof of the palace, piercing the smog-choked heavens, cutting through the void itself. Every ship in orbit above Terra went blind. The light burned through hulls, through auger arrays, through the minds of the living. Yet none turned away. Captains wept openly. Pilots bowed their heads. Even the servitors, whose minds were long since erased, paused in reverence. Across the galaxy, the Astronomicon flared brighter than ever before. Worlds that had not seen its light in millennia were suddenly bathed in its radiance. Warp storms parted. Lost fleets returned. Planets thought dead bloomed with life. But it was not uniform. For every world saved, another began to unravel. Some were consumed by warp inversion, their oceans turning to mirrored glass. Others burned under the weight of revelation, their inhabitants driven to madness by the sheer presence of the Emperor's thought. The Mechanicus called it the harmonization event. The Ecclesiarchy called it the dawn of his will. The Inquisition called it the end of reason. But to Valerian, it was something simpler. It was the sound of a god deciding whether he still wished to be one. Through the burning light, he saw the Emperor's form beginning to shift, the outlines blurring, fragments of golden armor dissolving into motes of starlight. The corpse upon the throne was no longer dead, yet not alive. It was becoming, Valerian's voice cracked. "What happens now?" The stranger's gaze lifted toward the light.
"Now," he whispered, "he dreams."
"And the galaxy must decide whether to dream with him, or wake to nothing." Outside, the beam from Terra struck the fading wound of the Eye of Terror, and the eye shuddered like a living thing. For a single moment, the light and the darkness balanced, two infinities staring into each other. The warp wind stilled, the screaming ceased, and somewhere, deep within the impossible distance between thought and flesh, something vast and human exhaled. The Emperor's light flickered once and then went out. Silence. Valerian fell to his knees. The air was cold again. The hum of machinery had returned, steady and dull. The throne still burned, but its occupant was still, neither alive nor gone. The stranger placed a hand on the custodian's shoulder. "He's not gone," he said softly. "He's resting, and when he wakes again, it won't be as we remember him." Valerian bowed his head. "And humanity?" The stranger's eyes dimmed. Humanity must learn to live without its god, or earn the right to call him back. Outside, the light of the Astronomicon flickered uncertainly. Across the Imperium, candles were lit, prayers whispered. Ships steadied their course through the new quiet of the void. The galaxy held its breath, and somewhere in the space between life and legend, a voice whispered. Not command, not wrath, but the faintest echo of hope. Be better. The beam of light collapsed into the stars, and Terra slept beneath its fading glow. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound, but the hollow stillness of meaning after revelation. It rolled outward from Terra like the dying breath of a sun, touching the stars one by one. The Astronomicon no longer sang. It flickered, a heartbeat slowed, a candle half shielded by wind. Across the Imperium, ships drifted, astropaths wept blood, and entire hive cities fell to their knees beneath skies that shimmered faintly with gold. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor was not entirely present, nor entirely gone. He was sleeping. Valerian stood before the golden throne, his armor dulled by ash and light. The stranger was gone. Whether he had faded with the final pulse of the Emperor's will, or merely stepped into the space between reality and dream, none could say. The custodian's mind replayed the voice, that last whisper that had cut through the roar of cosmic power like a blade through fog. Be better. What did that mean in a galaxy built on obedience? How could the Imperium, an empire forged in blood and fear, comprehend a command so simple, so human? In the cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, priests clung to new scriptures written in trembling hands, fragments of the Emperor's voice that some claimed had been imprinted upon the minds of the faithful. He spoke, he forgave, he will return. They named the event the Second Dawn, though none could explain whether it had saved or doomed them. The Inquisition, fractured by fear, declared the radiant heresy, an edict that outlawed all discussion of what had happened beneath the palace. But the people did not stop whispering. They prayed not to a god, but to the memory of a man who had once dared to dream of peace. In the void between stars, the light of the Astronomicon stabilized, weaker yet steadier, no longer divine but deliberate. Like a hand guiding rather than commanding, warp storms lessened, travel grew safer, and somewhere deep within the immaterium the great chaos gods raged in silence. The light had not destroyed them, but it had wounded them. Their laughter no longer echoed endlessly. Their empires of nightmare trembled on uncertain foundations. The demons whispered to one another of the dream that had touched even them, a dream of remembrance, of what they had been before they were madness. Abaddon upon the vengeful spirit watched the eye of terror shrink into a storm no larger than a world. He stood unmoving for hours, eyes fixed upon the fading wound that had defined his purpose. His ship was silent, no chants, no screams, only the quiet hum of systems gone cold. The demon in his gauntlet had fallen silent too, its voice extinguished like a snuffed flame. At last the War Master turned away, his expression unreadable. If he dreams, he murmured, then so must I. And for the first time in ages, the vengeful spirit did not set course for war, but drifted into the void without destination. Back on Terra, Valerian moved through the broken halls of the Imperial Palace. The light had scarred everything. Marble was cracked, gold melted into rivers that had cooled into strange living shapes, like the veins of a sleeping giant. The custodes stood silent, their loyalty unshaken yet their purpose uncertain. What were they, now that the god they guarded had chosen to rest? Were they protectors of a corpse again, or sentinels of a dream yet unfinished? Valerian approached the base of the throne. The mechanism still functioned, though dimly. The Emperor's body sat upright, unmoving, but there was a softness to his face now, as though the strain of millennia had eased. The smell of ozone lingered, but beneath it was something faintly organic, the smell of breath, not machinery. He had not abandoned them. He was waiting. Valerian knelt. His voice was quiet, nearly lost in the hum of the throne. We will keep your vigil, as we always have. But if you meant what you said, if you wish us to be better, then perhaps it is not your return we should seek, but our own. The wind stirred through the shattered roof. Dust floated like motes of gold. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the bells of the ecclesiarchy began to toll. Low, uncertain, but filled with something long forgotten, wonder. In the days that followed, rumors spread faster than any fleet. Some claimed to see golden figures walking across battlefields, healing the wounded and vanishing into the dawn. Others spoke of strange energy flowing through ancient Mechanicus forges, awakening machines older than the Imperium itself. On frontier worlds, new cults rose not in worship, but in remembrance, calling themselves the Children of the Dream. They carried no banners, built no temples, and recited no litanies. Instead, they spoke simple words: "We are his echo. We endure." The Adeptus Administratum struggled to contain the chaos. Decrees were rewritten daily, edicts contradicted themselves, and the High Lords of Terra met in secret, debating whether to announce that the Emperor lived. But no one could agree on what living meant anymore. And beneath all the fear and the faith, something subtle began to change. The common man, long forgotten beneath the weight of gods and machines, began to look to one another instead of the heavens. Soldiers fought not for glory but for the ones beside them. Pilgrims traveled not toward Terra but outward, to rebuild, to heal, to hope. It was small, fragile, and fleeting, but it was human. Valerian often stood alone at the palace's highest spire, watching the horizon shimmer with faint golden light. He thought of the stranger, his words, his calm, his terrible understanding. Perhaps he had been no man at all, but a fragment of the Emperor's own mind sent forth to guide this final act. Or perhaps he had been a messenger of something greater still, the memory of what humanity might have been before fear built empires. One evening, as the sun set behind the ruins of the palace, Valerian felt a presence beside him. A whisper, faint as the breath of stars. "You've done well, custodian." He turned, but there was no one there, only the faint shimmer of light fading into dusk. He smiled then, not in triumph but in understanding. The Emperor had not died, nor had he ascended. He had passed into the quiet place between myth and memory, where gods sleep and men remember why they were born. The bells continued to toll. The night fell, and as the last light of day touched the ruined spires of the Imperial Palace, it shimmered across the cracked marble like liquid dawn. For the first time in 1,000 centuries, Terra knew peace, fragile, uncertain, human peace, and far beyond the stars, somewhere in the void where light and dream meet, a great golden figure stirred, and not in power, but in hope. The Imperium would endure, not because a god commanded it, but because humanity at last had remembered how to dream.